outside of that, which to me is the secret of actually making compelling products, is you have to like figure out how how a product addresses fundamental human needs, right, outside of the context, or, it's not merely within the context of usability. It has more to do with utility. So it's, how people find things useful, what needs it fills.
Hey, and welcome to From the Pros to a New podcast, a podcast about UX design, where I'm taking the perspective of a newbie learning from professionals, hence the name, From the Pros to a New. And so I'm looking at having conversations with professionals, because sometimes the information online is just scattered everywhere and you don't know what's true, what's not. And I just want to find out from professionals who've been in the field, who've been working on it for decades or for years, longer at least than 5 years. And so for today, I have a very, very special guest for this first episode. He's an expert who's been in the field for the last 2 decades. And I'm talking about Jon Sandruck. Jon, you're a husband and a father. You have children, which means you're a dad. You're a chef. I see on your Instagram you like to post food and all of that great stuff. You're also an award-winning designer. I see that you've worked with some amazing companies such as AIGA and USAA. So I'm really thrilled that you're here. I'm thrilled that you even accepted the invite to be here. And so, I just wanted to welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm honored to be your first guest. Just to clarify something, AIGA is actually a nonprofit organization. It's a professional association for the field of design. Okay. And I was a chapter president. I served on a chapter board for about 10 years, and I was a chapter president and was involved with the national board, through that capacity. But the cool thing about that is that during that time gave me a really interesting point of view on the entire industry of design, and not just the companies that I worked for, which is what most of our points of view are informed by.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for clarifying that. I didn't know it was a nonprofit organization. I thought it was a company like most others. Okay,
yeah, their LinkedIn profile is messed up.
Yes, yes, which is what gave me the idea that they're a company. But in any case, for somebody who doesn't know you, who has no idea who you are, they haven't seen anything that you've done or heard anything about you, could you introduce yourself and maybe give us a bit of a background of where you come from?
Sure. So I'm a designer. I started my career in graphic design because, frankly, at the time, UX wasn't a thing. In fact, I taught web design as an undergrad when I was studying graphic design, because they didn't even teach web design yet in design school. I was purely computer science. I spent about 10 years doing graphic design and marketing, mostly doing brand work, working a lot with small businesses and nonprofits. And then in 2012, I decided to transition full-time to doing UX. I had been doing, web design and some application design and that kind of stuff as part of my design business, but I decided to devote myself to it full-time. Because of the change in the market, iPhone had come out, 5 years previous. The smartphone boom happened. Everybody suddenly needed software to be pretty. So I found myself in a very advantageous position of having the tools and the skills that I learned as a graphic designer suddenly being applicable to this new type of industrial design. So I jumped at it. Then I spent a few years at Sabre, which is a technology company that runs a significant portion of the world's travel infrastructure. And then at USAA, where I was a design director running a team supporting their insurance business. And then for the last 3 years, I've been heading up design for a fintech that unfortunately closed its doors in late February. So I'm on the market. If you know anybody who needs design leadership, give me a call.
Great. I think maybe if this podcast gets to some
Yeah.
place, maybe you can get some. You can get a.
Yeah. You need, you got a design team in need of leadership or a business that needs a design team built. I'm your guy.
That's great. Awesome. So before we go and take a deep dive into all of that you just mentioned, which is a lot, I really want to get into in your CV. You mentioned human-centered design, so I really want to get into that and just have a look
Yeah.
at that. But before we get started, just to do a bit of an icebreaker, I will give you two options, and you can choose which one you like best or whatever is your fancy. So sunrise or sunset?
Oh, sunset. I'm not usually up for sunrise.
Pasta
I
or
like to
rice?
sleep in.
Okay.
Pasta.
Okay.
Pasta. Although that's a close one.
Okay. Adventure or relaxation?
I've recently, I'm sorry, say that again. Adventure or relaxation?
Yes, adventure or relaxation.
Relaxation for sure. Relaxation.
Mm.
Yeah. In fact, we're getting ready to go on vacation in a couple of days, and I'm really looking forward to doing a whole lot of nothing.
Okay. That sounds relaxing. So painting or drawing?
Drawing. Drawing. Well, the reason I went to design school is because I wanted to be a comic book artist.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know why I thought that would be the right thing to do, but it was. And eventually I learned about the power that design has to like shape the made world and how we perceive it. And yeah, I kind of got all in on design. Although anytime you give me a new drawing implement, the first thing I do is draw Batman.
Yes, I saw that on your YouTube and your Threads bio where you said
Yeah.
drawing and Batman at the end. Okay, so flying or driving?
It depends on whether it would take more than 4 hours. I've given this a great deal of thought. If it takes less than 4 hours, I'll drive.
Okay. Okay. That's a good answer. Interesting answer. Concert or sport events?
Concert, for
Hmm.
sure.
Apple or Android?
Oh, Apple.
Hmm. Okay. Fiction or non-fiction?
Nonfiction. I very
All right.
rarely read fiction.
All right. All right. I get that. I'm the same. Gold or silver?
That's a good one. Aesthetically, I like silver better, but I don't really wear jewelry or anything. So, and now I'm thinking about the mechanical properties of these things and what's actually more useful. But I'll say silver, just aesthetically.
Going to the questions you mentioned I saw in your website and pretty much everywhere where you are. You mentioned that you are a human-centered designer, uh, which is interesting to me
Yeah.
because as I've been studying or for the last few weeks or months, studying UX, one term that I've come across more often or very often is that uh, to to make sure that my designs are user-centered. So they mention a lot user-centered design, user-centered design. So what I wanted to ask you, I guess, is that what is the difference between user-centered design and human-centered design? Is it the same thing or is just like a different way of putting it, or are they fundamentally different?
They're not fundamentally different. I would say user-centered design fits inside of human-centered design.
Okay.
User-centered design, you are focused on the user, like while they are using your thing.
Mhm.
And human-centered design is a little bit broader. It considers the human being needs outside of that, which
Okay.
to me is the secret of actually making compelling products. Is you
Yeah.
have to like figure out how how a product addresses fundamental human needs
Mm.
right outside of the context or it's not merely within the context of usability. It has more to do with utility. So it's how people find things useful, what needs it fills, and not simply just the need to complete a task, but like if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like which needs in the hierarchy you can fill the product.
Okay. Um, that that's a good answer because it sounds so
Thanks.
similar. It sounds so similar. I'm not saying it in a way to judge or anything, but I'm just saying that it helps clarify because the two of them sound very similar.
Yeah,
At least when I study it or when I looked it up, they both just sounds very different. So
there are a lot of things like that in this field where like they seem kind of similar, and so people kind of use them interchangeably. And
yes,
I think especially new designers kind of leads them astray. That makes them think that, oh, this is really the same thing. Um, that's true of design in general, but
yes,
UX design has kind of a lot of it.
yes, like product design and user experience design, they both sound very similar.
Yeah.
Okay. So having or being where you are, as in you are able to teach teams and uh, train people, if I could say that way, or just take the user experience and make it something useful based on tests and all of that. So you know the entire process. But for somebody who's just starting out, which skills would you say that was valuable to you um, to get started in order to be where you are right now? You mentioned graphic design earlier, but they're not exactly the same thing. So which skill did you have to take to go from graphic designer to human-centered designer?
I think the big one is interaction design. Um,
Mhm.
which is a thing that the So the reason that graphic design is super important, because it is super important for UX designers, uh, is that that's the skill that lets you make a thing and then argue about that thing with your stakeholders instead of having abstract arguments. Abstract arguments are impossible to resolve. There's a million ways you could go. There's a million misunderstandings, right? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. A
Mm,
prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. So the ability to just make a thing and then
yes,
argue about that thing instead of
yes,
about the abstraction,
yes.
that's the most useful thing. However you choose to do that. For me, that was graphic design tools because those are the tools that I had.
Mm,
And for most, I think user interface and UX designers, that's probably the number one thing is they have Figma or Photoshop or Sketch or whatever they use. They make a thing, you argue
mm,
about it, you make decisions and move on. Um, I also am a big proponent of people learning to code because if you can write front end code, you
mm,
can make a thing that looks and acts like the thing, even though it
mhm,
wouldn't hold up to like, production constraints or anything. And
mm,
I do code and I find that to be a very useful skill as
mm.
well. It's just a different design tool.
Okay, so you would, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that we can learn how to not just design things, but also argue our point into as to why we designed it the way we did, and also to learn to code so that we perhaps able to test what we designed and before bringing it to a developer or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah, and the point is not necessarily to be able to argue for the point you made. The point is to, or the point of view that you hold. The point is
Mm,
to be able to align with stakeholders, right?
okay.
So there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding that happens,
Mm,
um, and the easiest way to figure out if you're pointed in the same direction
mm,
is to show them a thing and say, "Is this what you meant? Is this what you were talking about? Does this accomplish the goals?" And
okay.
then you're going to end up, talking about the differences, which is fine. There's always differences.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. Um, yeah, I was also wondering when you said abstract, what was it? You mentioned abstract argument, something like that. Uh,
Yeah.
What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, that could be super abstract, like user needs to be able to do this thing, right? And you might disagree about what the steps in that process are, right? Or it might be super um, specific, right? Someone can say, I need this graph to be a line chart that shows this on the x-axis and this on the y-axis, and I need these indicators on the chart. And to them, that is clear as day.
Mm,
They can see it in their brain. They know exactly what it is.
mm,
But you might have different ideas about how that works. And the easiest way to resolve those differences is to show them what's in your brain so that they can say, oh, that's not what I was thinking about at all.
okay.
In my mind, it has to be like this. And then hopefully you can like get into the reasons why that's true and not just, having them tell you what to do.
Okay.
Um, Yeah,
Okay.
especially in technical products. It happens a lot. Like the example I was thinking of in my brain was a stock trading thing. And there's like very specific ways about like the way that stock trading charts work. And there are reasons for that stuff. And, 100 years of precedent and all that other jazz that like, if you just come in and change it people are going to make bad decisions and lose money
Mm,
and never be unhappy. Right. So it's, you need to understand the context.
yes, yes. So what is one thing that you say helps you understand the concept? It's like, is it human psychology? Is it what exactly do you do to help you understand?
Um, well, I personally like to learn how to do things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like the stock trading example, um, when I designed Trade Monster back in 2012, Trade Monster Mobile, um, I placed, I did research. I spent time with stock traders, right?
Okay.
I didn't know what to call it then, but I know now to call it contextual inquiry, where you sit with them and watch them do their job and try to interrupt them as little as possible, and um, ask them questions when they, do stuff you don't understand. Um, and then I used existing platforms, learned how to do every different type of options trade, how they made money, all that other stuff, and traded with a fake portfolio for weeks to learn how to do the thing. That's the way I do it. I did the same thing at Sabre where I learned how to use their GDS software. I spent time with travel agents. Um, yeah, so that's the way I do it. Lots of places don't allow you that kind of access.
Mm,
Um, Lots of times, the best you can do is going online and spending time in online communities for people like that. But the key is to get real understanding from people who are doing it right now, because subject matter experts are usually experts on the software and not the people. And I think it's our job, if we're user experience designers, if we're trying to make human centered designs,
mm.
we need to be experts in the people. That's that's the gig.
That sounds like a tall order to be an expert in people. Uh, how do you?
Well, that's why you do it in little slices, right? You identify a little chunk of people, and you're like, okay, I'm going to become an expert in, you know, professional options traders
Okay.
for and only for a period of time.
Mm,
Um, and then the other thing that's can feel kind of daunting about that is that you have to understand that you can't actually become an expert in options traders. You can know about the people that you meet, and it can give you ideas. And that's where the skills that I learned as a graphic designer, which was, somewhat about like having enough information to be inspired to come up with a solution, right? That's kind of how this kind of design works too. It's not math, right? You're not going to get an answer. You're
yeah.
going to get information, and then
Okay.
your brain converts that information into an idea. And
Okay.
you're going to like try as many ideas as you practically can and figure out which one's going to work.
Okay. Okay. That works for me because I come from an engineering background, so to me
Right.
everything is pretty much mathematics. Um,
Right. And that's one of the things that makes it different from engineering, although my dad's an engineer, and we talk about what it is I do, and he's like, yeah, you do the fun part of my job. The part where you figure out how to get the people to do the thing, right?
Yes.
Like engineers mostly are trying to figure out how to make the system do the thing,
Yes.
and the system that designers work with is the people.
Yes. Okay.
People
Okay.
are wildly diverse and not very well documented.
Yes, that's true. Because I guess that's the part that I'm still trying to work into or learn the most. Because, like I said, I come from an engineering background. So to me, everything has got to be like one, two, three, four, five. But I'm learning with design, it's not necessarily the same. You have to think outside the box and think outside of the process sometimes.
Well, I mean, it's actually a big part of the process, right? Like
Mm.
if you heard the term design thinking, that gets thrown around and sort of conflated with human-centered design a lot.
Yes.
But that's actually just the process of oscillating between divergent thinking and convergent thinking, right?
Mm,
Divergent thinking meaning you're thinking of all of the possible solutions,
mm,
right? And then convergent thinking where you're whittling them down to the one you're going to do. Doesn't even necessarily mean it's the one best one, just the one you're going to do,
mm. Okay.
right? Design thinking is going through that repeatedly. So you're thinking about like, okay, so what are all of the problems we could solve? Here's the
Mm,
problem we're going to solve. What are
okay.
all of the solutions to that problem? Here's the solution we're going to do, right? And it just
Okay.
keeps going through that process, and the diamonds get smaller and smaller and smaller until you're in production, and hopefully at that point you have a good idea what you're doing.
Yes. That's very helpful. So knowing that if you were to start today, in this current world that we live in, with information everywhere and a lot of courses, influencers releasing courses, and it's a very interesting landscape. But if you were to start today, um, where would you start, or where would you recommend somebody to start?
Oh, that's a good question because there is a lot of information out there, and a lot of it is not great.
Yes.
Um, I tend to look to um, groups that have really great reputations. So at the top of my head, I think the Norman Nielsen group,
Mm,
which, if you're not familiar with them, was co-founded by Jacob Nielsen and Don Norman, who
yes.
were respectively the head of design for Microsoft and the head of design for Apple for decades, and then formed this group. They're basically an industry authority on this stuff. If I was looking for schools, Carnegie Mellon is awesome. I know people who teach there, and I have led people who have gone to school there, and they come out of those programs with fantastic skills.
Mm,
Um, and I'm trying to think if there's any like accessible online ones that I really like. But Norman Nielsen Group does offer certifications. They're a little expensive, and also I don't have any. I've never felt the need to get any certifications, but who knows? That might change. But they have a lot of free information on their website too. Lots of great
yes.
articles. They do very thoughtful research. Um,
Yes.
I also look to the Design Management Institute.
Mm, okay.
Um, the UK has a design council. They're a good source of information. I'm very wary of places that are trying to actually like make money and sell consulting.
Mm,
So, or places that are trying to set up employee pipelines, right? So, like Google had a thing. I don't know if they still do. I know Microsoft now has a thing through Coursera. Um, IDEO has IDOU. I actually went through an IDOU class, and it was good. I'm a little IDEO is definitely one of those places who's trying to sell consulting, and so um, but they do have good information, especially on human centered design.
okay. Thank you.
Just my favorites. I'm sure I'm missing some, right? Like just in the moment.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm leaving places off my list. Don't come for me, internet.
It's okay. Um, I'm sure nobody's gonna come with forks and machetes at you because you gave some great information already. So if anybody is looking for something, they can just go to what you already mentioned. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. I see Zoom is is gonna kick me out soon. So I really appreciate you spending the time to answer some questions, and I will
Sure.
make sure to add your links that you mentioned in the description or in the show notes of this episode. Um, but really quick, if somebody is looking to get in touch with you, they want to learn from you or anything like that, where can they get in touch with you?
I'm pretty eminently Googleable. So my website is jon.sandruck.com.
Mhm.
I answer messages through LinkedIn, that kind of stuff for professional things. I don't really check my messages on any of the meta stuff. So Facebook, Instagram, Threads. I don't really keep track of my inbox.
Okay.
Um, they've abused their right to send me push notifications, so I just don't see them. Uh, yeah, but the easiest way is my website.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thanks again for your time. It's
Yeah,
been valuable.
absolutely.
It's really been valuable. Um,
Thank you.
since I met you on Threads and we had that one conversation, I was like, I have to talk to him, because you were one of the people who had information that made sense in the sense that you weren't just talking from experience and all of that, but you also mentioned books, which were a great resource for me. So that's why I'm saying you were one of those that were at the very top for
Yeah,
me.
it's design is a tough field because it's always moving faster than the authority structures, the institutions and stuff, right?
Mm,
Um, and because most people's only experience with it practically is where they work, it's
mm,
really easy to get sort of a um, it's a myopic view of it where it works the way that it worked at the company that I worked for. Especially when a lot of those places churn employees, and so they start to form like a sort of um, like a monoculture around design that exists at a couple of different companies. Up here in Seattle, it's you got Amazon, Google, and Microsoft that
mm.
and Meta that trade employees a lot, and so a lot of their design stuff ends up kind of looking the same
Yes.
and ignores what's happening in the rest of the industry. So if you work at a smaller company,
Mm.
you might not have that experience at all. It's important. I mean, the question I believe that you asked was like, what's the difference between UX and product design?
Yes.
And the the best answer I have for that is read the job description because it'll tell you what you're going to be doing.
Mm.
They can mean the same thing, but at some places they don't. Some places can't afford to have specialists like that. Um, some people don't know that there ever would be a difference. So kind of where they are in their like maturity as an organization.
Okay.
Um, yeah, you just gotta figure it out.
Awesome. So I'm really sorry we have to stop here because Zoom is very
Yeah,
going that way. But we can
yeah. It's
pick
giving,
it up.
it's showing me the little thing too.
Yeah, we can pick it up another time if you're willing to. I would love to
Yeah, absolutely.
discuss
Thank you
more
for
things.
having me on. I'm honored to be your first guest. Um, good luck with the podcast.
Wow, just like that, it's the end of episode one. Can you believe it? So, as you can see, we're rushing towards um, the last few minutes because we only had a few minutes left. But you know what? Jon Sandruck is coming back for a later episode, which I am so looking forward to. Until then, you'll find the links to everything he mentioned in the description or the show notes of this episode. If there is something that you loved or that you took away that for any of the projects you're working on, I'd love to hear from you. What are you working on and what did you learn in this episode if you learned anything? If there is anything that you didn't like, I would also love to hear from you because this is the first episode and I want to make this podcast better and better and I want to make it beneficial for yourself and for myself as well and anybody watching and everybody participating. So if there's anything that you like or you didn't like, I'd love to hear from you. Until then, enjoy. Bye.